All right, so part two, summertime, deep drop. Again, we've been all over the place the last 3 months deep dropping. And so I'm usually running the boat, and a couple of the trips I was actually able to get on the rod, have fun with it. And, once in a while, the cool thing about deep dropping is there's a competition sometimes. If Nick's on one side of the boat or one in front and I'm in back,
We all know who's going to win.
we want to know who can catch more fish, right? So there's always this underlying competition between guys to catch more fish. Now, one of the interesting things when I look at it, I look at technique of hooking a fish on the deep drop, where most people are going to say, "What do you mean technique on hooking fish on a deep drop? You drop it down, you hit the bottom, you wind it. As soon as the rod starts to jump, then you hit the button, right?" So, truthfully, no, that's not the correct way. Can you catch fish doing that? Yes. Remember, you're a slayer, because I know that's what you like. He likes to eat fish, a lot of it.
It shows.
But the technique of hooking a fish on the bottom, we're going to take you through a scenario of hooking a fish, and I need you to think about it from this perspective. I've got two different leads here. One's an 8-pound, one's a 5-pound lead. And I want you to think about, A, how deep we're dropping. Is there any current? Most of the places that we fish, whether that was in the Gulf of Mexico or in the Bahamas or even in the Keys, relatively a lot lighter than it is here, okay? So when we talk about dropping and hitting the bottom, talk about your scenario. I want you to tell me what you see most people do in a deep drop situation.
Of trying to hook the fish?
Yes, take me through the standard of what you see, then I'm going to tell you what I see, and let's talk about this.
95% of people, when they start seeing the bites, it's 50-50 on this part. They'll either free spool it a little bit, thinking they're feeding the fish,
Yes.
and then they'll reel to try to set the hook.
Okay.
Or they'll just let it boom, 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 it's biting, and then they'll reel away. That's the most common thing I see people do. What I do is I let it in free spool the whole time. Sometimes I barely come tight to watch the bites. And I'll do it, let it just pan out line as we drift and let the lead almost hook the fish.
Right.
And then when I want to reel them up, I usually start reeling pretty slow. And then I start coming up faster. But when I say slow, like with a circle hook, in my opinion, if one's not completely on the rig yet, and you reel up real fast, you're just pulling the hook out of its mouth. So like if I'm using an LP or a hooker or whatever reel, you can engage the reel and slowly put the drag up so that it slowly pulls the rig up. And then when they're on there and you're pulling it up. But don't just jerk it away from them. Going super fast, thinking you're setting the hook, I've seen more failure that way than actual success.
Right. So I'm going to dive a little deeper into that for a second. And I want you to think about what he's saying. Now I'm going to take what he said and I'm going to go deep. You ready? So imagine, if you will, we're in 500 or 600 feet. Hold the end of that. And so the rig is roughly somewhat vertical. It's not over there. Most of the time when you're deep dropping, you're somewhat over the rig. So imagine this rig is somewhat vertical. Now Nick hits the bottom and says, and usually the lead probably does that, and he starts to let out line, and slowly. Now what's happening as he's letting out line, he's not tight to the rod tip, so what's happening is, as a fish eats this bait, let's say, so this bait is now here, you've got really very little tension on this end, so the fish eats the bait here and starts to pull, hooking himself against the lead.
Agreed.
He's not hooking himself. The person who's winding quickly is trying to hook him from here, pulling up, whereas Nick has put the lead on the bottom. Here's the hook. The fish is eating it, and now as he swims away, he's pulling on the lead to hook him. In most scenarios, probably the more effective way is to let line out while you're sitting there. Hit the bottom, pay the line out like Nick is talking about, let the circle hook do its job. This is the closest point of tension, not the rod tip from the surface. This is where you need to hook your fish. And so what does that look like, right? Your rod,
Yep.
all of a sudden you're there, and now it's bouncing, but you're not doing this with the rod.
No.
All you see is the bounce. So now as you see the bounce, hey, I really know that we're in a spot with fish. And if you're fishing for a yellow eye snapper,
Yep.
you're fishing for a vermilion snapper, generally there's a pack of them, not a single. When you talk about queens, you're talking about, you know, colonies, but really most people catch one queen on a rig.
Correct.
Most people catch one snowy on a rig.
Yep.
But if you're in a snapper spot fishing for a yellow eye snapper, leave that sucker on the bottom, let them hook themselves on the lead, and give it time. Let the rod jump for a while. Okay, well think about this scenario. You've got one, maybe two fish on. Now you got four fish on and they're lifting the rig. So your rod's almost standing up. This is off the bottom. But by changing, even if you don't need it, to this 8-pound lead, put the 8-pound lead on there. Now try to lift this hook with a bait on it with an 8-pound lead. You're really hooking them, especially when you got four. So now the more fish you got kind of requires a little bit more lead. Now, the guy we were just talking about, the number one lead he used was a 7. It was a 7-pound lead, I believe, right? Always loved the 7-pound lead. 8-pound lead, if you can use 3 or 5 pounds to hold bottom, no problem. Don't be afraid to go up 3 or 4 pounds from the hooking the fish perspective. Now we got 3 fish on this sucker. Now you can wind it up. Technique-wise, tell me about, I want you to explain to me winding it. Now that you feel like you've filled your rig, tell me about winding it up.
I don't go max speed because most of the time you'll see you're on max and the rod tip's jumping and then it stops. You see a couple smaller taps and you pull it up and you're missing 2 baits and it's like, okay, well, you pulled it up so fast that you actually pulled the hook out of the fish or tore it out of the fish. So I would say the first 50% of the water column, if you're an 800, 400 feet off the bottom, I go fairly slow. I don't know how to judge the speed.
Sure.
But
it's not full blast.
never full blast. If I know I have good fish on, I never go full blast.
You know who said full blast? Shatner in Star Trek. Full blast. I don't know what made me think of that. But what are you saying is huge. Think about this for a second. Creating the scenario, we know we got fish on this rig. I'm going to start coming up from the bottom, which in the first 200 feet is really when you're going to see the rod have a reaction to all these fish doing what they're doing. After that 200 to 300 foot or even 100 foot, the rod every once in a while does a little kick. It's almost like, okay, now we got them coming, okay?
Yep.
But in that first 100 feet, it's crucial not to like jack on them,
Correct.
especially if you're in a 3 or 4 foot sea where the rod's going like this and now it's going down. So it's letting it slip.
Yep.
Allow the rig to do what it's doing by going relatively slow. There's not really a shark issue yet because we're not near the surface. And so the closer you get to the surface, the more even-keeled the rig seems to be without a lot of jumping. Okay, can you speed it up at that point?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's when we speed up, but
If I see a lot of jumping, you don't want to pull harder.
correct,
Let the fish fight against the lead and the tension that's already there.
right,
And if you notice it's not fighting as hard, yeah, you can jack it up a little bit.
correct.
But at the end of the day, they never just pull straight up. Their mouth is usually open and they're spinning and they'll spin right off.
Right, right.
Sometimes on a flat, calm day, you'll look back behind the boat and there's one floating 100 yards behind you.
That's right. That's right. But, you know, and like, talk about that for a second. So you think about this. If you fight a queen, which fights, if you fight a gray tile, is a fighter, golden tile, fighter. When you get the bite, you know you've got a substantial fish. Yellow eyes, yeah, okay, there's a little bit of fight. And some of the big ones that you see in some of these pictures, yeah, they fight. But then they kind of mellow out. Queen will give you some real pulls. Now, think about it. If I'm in high speed and I pull the fish off within 200 to 200 feet of the bottom, they go back to the bottom. If I pull the fish off in the top 200 to 300, where's the fish going?
Back to the surface.
Correct. That's why you go slow, make sure you get them off the bottom. That way, even if you do pull them off in that last quadrant of water that you're in, at least they will float up. And most of the time, we're fishing, it's flat calm, and you can see them, and you go over and get them.
Yep.
That's the beauty of the speed of the reel. Again, little techniques and tactics that we see of guys using the reel. Lastly, on this segment, you say you hit the bottom. When you hit the bottom, maybe you wind it up a little bit. You get that perfect kind of feel to where you're sitting your lead on the bottom, and you're letting it out slowly, right? When do you decide, hey, I need to kind of come tight and come up a little bit? Because granted, let's just say at the front of the store right now is where the snapper school is.
Yeah.
But you don't want to leave your lead over here 30 yards from it.
No. I mean, I almost always drag my lead until I get a bite.
Drag it.
So, okay, you're dropping, you hit bottom. As soon as it hits bottom, I free spool for a second, but like
Correct.
under tension,
Yes.
so that the rig's, in my opinion, the rig is something like this, because the lead's on the ground now. We're slowly drifting or bumping out of gear, so the rig's spread out. Give it 5, 10, 15 seconds, and
Yep.
then you can either tighten up and drag it some,
Right.
or you can reel up 20 or 30 feet and re-drop it. But I never hit bottom and then reel up 15 turns
Right, and sit there.
and sit there. I never do that. I know a lot of people that do that.
Yes.
I've just never had success that way, because I feel like your whole rig will be moving too fast, and
Right.
I don't know how aggressive a yellow eye really is when the rig's moving. Is one going to latch on and the rest going to follow? I don't know. I do know if there's yellow eyes on this little rock pile
Yes.
and my lead is sitting right there,
Yes.
they're going to eat it.
Correct.
So that's always my method.
But leaving it allows them to be in that spot when they do it.
Yeah.
But now I'm saying so two things. He's going to drag it in a place where there's no,
Rocks.
when you look at your bottom machine and you see red, on most people's bottom machine, yellow and red, that's hard bottom.
Yeah.
Green and yellow, softer bottom. You can kind of tell, gravelly bottom. You need to know what the bottom is, right? And obviously, most of the time on a drop, you sometimes just stick in the mud. If you stick in the mud, look at your machine and it'll tell you, wow, it's green on the bottom. It must be soft here, or yellow. And then when you get to a spot where it's hard, you're going to see red. So understanding the bottom is understanding how I'm going to fish this. So if I'm and Nick Stanzik, awesome with this bottom fishing. That's what he does. He knows his bottom. Do me a favor, hit the bottom, customer Bob, and leave it there. Pay out the line. When you decide to come up, hit the bottom, hit it fast, relocate the lead, go back down, pay it out again. So I'm not dragging and I'm not hooking the bottom. So again, if you're in a place where you can drag, golden tile fishing, yeah, you can drag. Rosy fishing, most of the time. But understanding lifting the lead or dragging the lead, Fink, Eric Finkelstein loves to drag the lead. Loves to see it hit every once in a while. Look at the rod tip, it's perfect. I'm thinking, just leave it there, Eric. Now when he gets a bite,
Drops
then
it.
he lets it. So he calls it, when it kisses the bite, oh, you see that kiss? Like he calls this a kiss with the rod tip because it keeps doing this. But when he does get that bite and he sees the first one, he lays it. Now we're also in a place that there's no rocks.
Yeah.
So understand the technique of what you're going to do depends on the bottom. let's go into another segment. Don't forget to watch this next one.